everyone. So my name's Di, and I create unusual musical instruments. And I'm going to start by showing you one of them, which is called the human harp. And then I'm going to start by showing you a film, actually, about the human harp, and I'm going to talk about that project. And then a second one that I did last year for the European City of Science. And I'll finish by just giving you a little insight as to what's been going on for the last 6 weeks here as part of my residency. So here's the human harp. So to describe my work, I really like taking my work outside wherever possible, because I find that that's a place where I guess I get more creative, and it changes the lens, the way I look at the world. And so, for example, when I'm outside, I might see a bridge and imagine that it's a giant harp, or a zebra crossing, and see that as potentially a keyboard, or even a gasometer, which I love, and maybe that's a drum. It could be all sorts of things. And it's sort of, this way of working has established itself over a while. And I started off actually as a fashion designer many years ago, and which is why much of my work is wearable or body-centric. So very often it's relating to sound, so that when the wearer, or the musician as I call them, interacts with the piece, they trigger sound in different ways. But not all of it is sound-based, but very often I create films as a way to show how these things kind of work and unfold, and that usually incorporates sound as well. So as I said, I started off as a fashion designer. I studied at St. Martin's quite a few years ago. And it was at a time when there was actually a recession when I first got my job as a fashion designer in the early 2000s. And people were saying, what's the future of fashion, you know, particularly for smaller independent labels. And it seemed to me a good idea to perhaps explore that and look into how technology, digital technologies, might shape the future of fashion. And so I set off on this rather epic quest and disappeared from London for about 5 years, visiting and sort of embedding myself in all these different labs and learning about technology, which at the time was quite unnerving, working with engineers for the very first time. But slowly I created this, well, we all collectively created a kind of dialogue where we found ways to understand each other. So as I've said, the centre of the work that I do is the body, and obviously the fashion and the wearable is important in that. More and more the things that I make look less like something you'd call clothing and maybe a bit more sculptural. As I said, I love being out in the city, the urban environment, and very often draw inspiration for what I do from that. So quite often these wearable devices tend to connect with the urban space, such as bridges. And by moving the body, you're then able to trigger sounds. And this is all sort of held together in a bubble of technology, and I call it poetic technology because it's not necessarily visible, but it's just there to tell a story. And the outcome of all these things, quite often I do these kind of pop-up labs where we test ideas with the public, and then quite often interventions just in public space, so anyone can sort of stumble across a performance. And then in more traditional settings, and also I found film is a really nice way to express these ideas, particularly the more fantastical they get. You don't have to invest in the technology. So the Human Harp is a project I started about 4 years ago, or maybe longer, and it started off when I was doing one of those residencies in New York City, and I'd quite often go, I was literally booted out of the Fab Lab actually, because I was really enjoying using the laser cutter, and they said you should really start thinking about your work a bit more, and I got booted out, and they said, you know, go and read or go and look at soak up at the city. And so I started going to the Brooklyn Bridge most days, and I'd sit, I don't know why I was drawn to it, and I'd sit on the walkway of the Brooklyn Bridge and became fascinated by the sounds that I could hear. And so the sounds of the walkway, the sounds of the drone of traffic beneath, and all of these kind of merging sounds, the human hum of people as they walked along, no longer sort of language specific. And all of these merging together, and it struck me that this was a kind of musical experience, and that the bridge was perhaps a giant string instrument or a harp waiting to be played. And so I started picturing this shadowy figure connected to the bridge, and I wasn't quite sure her function. But when I got back to London, I started to draw obsessively this kind of harp bridge character until it filled the walls of my studios. And I heard word of the Brooklyn Bridge's 130th anniversary and decided that this was my chance to try and make this bridge instrument. And so I went to Queen Mary University of London with this sketch, and it looked a bit like this, and I was imagining perhaps we could make a modular instrument that could connect to the bridge and pick up the sounds and the vibrations, and by pulling a string, a bit like an old-fashioned, you know, musical toy, you could release the sound of the bridge. And so working with engineers from Queen Mary, we started to develop this device which we called the Human Harp, and the idea was it was a portable device that could mix and remix the sounds from the environment, from the bridge, which we'd pick up with contact mics, and by playing with a string which could connect to your body. And so the very first test we did on the Brooklyn Bridge, which is here, and there's a video. Shall I show the video? Yeah, maybe I will. From that, you can see that on my website. So this became a kind of thing. So after I'd done it on one bridge, other bridges started to be interested, like Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol, and another bridge in Omaha. And I suddenly started to realise that it was becoming quite a collaboration. And I realised that in order to make this a reality, I needed to collaborate with people in different laboratories and different universities and different startups at each location that I visited. And so this kind of knowledge bridging was taking place, where we were linking and sharing resources, and kind of a huge flock of people became involved. And the project, it was amazing, but it was also really stretching me in my brain, because I guess maybe some element of me is quite an introvert who could be very happy just making something in my studio, like a new instrument or something. But then all of a sudden, you know, you're having to communicate with all these people, and it's kind of wonderful, and it changes you, which is a lovely thing. But also after 3 years of it, I was like, I needed to do something different. So I started to have this conflict between the right hand and the left hand side of my brain. Am I doing all right for time? Yeah. And I realized that I didn't want to look at big things for a while. I wanted to look at small things. And I wanted to see if I could make a really intimate musical experience, likening it to the idea of crawling into somebody's ear and tumbling into their brain while they listen to music. And so at this time, I got a residency for the European City of Science, which was about a year ago. And I started working with neuroscientists, exploring the ways in which our brains process sound, and looking, as quite a few people have spoken about today, synesthesia, and how some people might taste sound or see it as a colour or a shape. And so I decided, after seeing this amazing thing called the augmented sandbox, have any of you seen that? It's really cool, where you have a sandbox, and when you play with the sand, you can create rivers and mountains and all this kind of thing. But it just blew my mind when I saw it, and I thought, surely if you can, it was using a Kinect, so the Kinect camera was sending an infrared beam down onto the sand and measuring the sort of flux and change of the sand, and then responding with different graphics, which were projected onto the sand in real time. And I thought, surely if you can do this with graphics, you could actually make sound with sand and have the graphics as well. And so I started, we set up a live lab in Manchester, where we got in some musicians, a coder, 2 big sandpits, lots of kids and different people passing through, to sort of explore the idea of what should sand sound like, and what would it be like to play sand, and what does sound look like, and what does it feel like. And so, and getting the words sand and sound mixed up a lot. So the outcome of this was the sound pit, and this is a kind of touring kit that we've put together. We've just got an Arts Council grant, actually, to create this kit and show it at the National Media Museum in Bradford. So if any of you are passing through, it's going to be there all of June. So part of the so the kit consisted of a Kinect camera, a projector, and some speakers and a sandpit. And in terms of our process, we started to connect different sounds. Like, we had a whole palette of sounds which we connected to different visuals. And I created, each sandpit had its own sonic personality, which is Zoob, Norman, Gloob, don't know why I called them that. And when you manipulated and played with the sand, you trigger a series of particles and hear a sound at the same time. And so this is how the piece was installed finally as part of the Manchester Science Festival. And here's a video, and I should really apologise for the quality of the sound on this video, sorry.
It's really sounding
I'll probably stop there. But so that was the sound pit, and the result of that was after having quite an insular indoors moment, I felt like travelling again, and I started to think about a travelling laboratory. What would happen if you could start creating kind of instruments, like playing different structures, basically getting a camper van, chucking a load of stuff in it, like different materials that you could use, not being too tech heavy, and playing different structures such as, I don't know, gasometers or silos, to find kind of maybe more Heath Robinson-esque ways of doing this, or even perhaps, the Lovell telescope or somewhere like that, and thinking about making music with these kind of things. And it was at this point where I was starting to develop this project that Susie emailed me and said, did I want to put in a pitch for the project here as part of Thinking Digital Arts, the artist residency. So I proposed a project which was inspired by the building itself, I think, which was the inspiration, wasn't it, as part of the pitch. And I started off thinking about the structure of the building and thinking about the word sage to start with, and thinking about wisdom, and imagining this building as a living entity that was kind of making decisions and moving and learning and soaking up the sounds of the people that passed through it, which were then embedded in its fabric. And what would it be like if this building started or made the decision to grow instrumentation and sing? What would that sound like? And so I put a pitch in, and then went on holiday, and then had a Skype. got news. I had a Skype in Thailand after 2 glasses of wine, which was my interview basically, and proposed this idea, and amazingly got it. So thanks, Susie. And so these were my slightly, because you get the holiday vibe from these sketches. It's just like, wow. I started to think about how instrumentation might grow from a structure like this, and imagining that it was industrial design was matching to the materials that you see in here, but that inside it was like fruit or jelly or biological. And I like this idea of kind of biological and architecture and industrial design all coming together. And I started to imagine a character called the janitor, who would wander the corridors after dark here, and started to discover this different apparatus around the building. And I started to think of the ways that this apparatus might reveal itself from all the fruit that I was eating on holiday. I was quite into coconuts, and but I was thinking about the idea of, like the interior of a coconut, all of the lovely coconut milk inside, or peeling a banana, or opening things up like oysters to reveal berries, or opening up an avocado and there's a seed inside. So I decided that all of this instrumentation would grow in the same way as fruit would grow, and spread its seeds. And so I started to create a storyboard, and I realized that in order to do this during my first visit, this place is massive, isn't it? And when I wandered around, I suddenly felt really quite scared. And so I decided to move here for 6 weeks. So I've been lurking around in the basement, a bit like the janitor, sort of like furtively creeping around, getting to know the space and the people here, who've been amazing, really amazing, and let me do lots of, we've mostly been said yes to, haven't we, when we asked to do things, even if they're crazy. So a storyboard started to happen. I'm not going to reveal too much, because fingers crossed you'll see the film quite soon. We're still waiting for it to be sent over, but don't panic. So here's just a few scenes from the story. They're not, not giving too much away. Whoop, studio photo, forgot to put that in. And here's some of the devices that we developed. So like a device that would bong the banisters. And here's Will and Todd. So Will's here. Hi, Will. And so some great guys came and helped Luke over here as well with the development, because we had a hell of a job on our hands trying to make all the props for the film. And so yeah, this is a banister donger. We didn't quite give it a name, but this is us just testing it out using dog throwing apparatus. And I basically ended up, the pound shop was my best friend. Here's another test. And I don't know if that's a video, is it? Yeah, there you go. Stop that before I give too much away. This is another little thing, another musical thing. And we even got permission to do some stuff on the roof. And so Susie and I climbed up to the roof, and we've even done a little bit of filming on the roof. So I think I'll finish with this, just a quick clip, so you can meet the janitor. But I think, and then I'll call it a day. So here's janitor. There's no sound. Here's the janitor. She's got a good set of clinky keys. And that's it. That's all I'm going to show you. So, thank you.